Okay, we're about ready to start. Eight o'clock. 1 second. Parshas Vaero. It's the second parsha in the book of Exodus. Parshas Vaero is the second parsha in the book of Exodus, where we are mainly focusing on the part of the story of Moshe finally confronting Pharaoh and begins delivering him the 10 plagues. This week's parsha, we are going to see the plague of blood, dam, and we're going to have the first 7 plagues. The first 7 plagues is this week's parsha, and the next parsha is going to be the last 3. Parshas Bo is going to be the last 3 plagues and the great Exodus. What I want to focus our attention tonight in tonight's class is, and this was the title that I sent out today, the title was 3-Day Exodus. Something that is being found as a mystery, that someone actually asked me this question this past week, and because he asked me that question, it caused me to kind of like go back to the commentary and try to understand what exactly is this constant expression that Moshe tells Pharaoh, we are going out to the desert for 3 days. Derech shloishes yamim nelech. Keeps on talking about a 3-day journey. I mean, obviously, we all know that they went for 40 years and not a 3-day journey. But when Moshe talks to Pharaoh, he keeps on emphasizing this idea, we are going for 3 days. We're going to perform some sacrifices for a 3-day journey. Something really mysterious about this 3-day journey that he keeps on talking about. We're going for 3 days, we're going for 3 days, where I don't know if there was ever a plan to go for 3 days only. Where does this whole idea of 3 days come from? So I decided, because someone asked me, and I should have had this question probably when I learned it about 20 years ago or 30 years ago. But I never asked the question, what is this whole idea that Moshe keeps on telling Pharaoh, we're going on a journey of 3 days? Whose plan was it to go for 3 days? Was there ever a plan that this shouldn't be the grand exodus and never come back? Keeps on telling him we're going for 3 days. Let us second see where it all started. And it was interesting because once I started looking into this, I found that actually this is God's idea. It's not that Moshe is lying to Pharaoh that he's going for 3 days. When God is introducing Moshe on his mission to go talk to Pharaoh, and I encourage you, if you have a Chumash, you could open up in page 358 in the Chumashim that we have in our shul. If you don't have a Chumash, you could look in chapter 3, verse 18. This is last week's Parsha, when Moshe is encountering God at the burning bush. And God is telling him, page 357, guys. God is telling Moshe to go gather the Jewish people and tell them, God, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, has remembered you and whatever was done to you in Egypt. And God is going to take you out of Egypt and bring you to the land of milk and honey. And God is telling them that the Jewish people will listen to you and they will be super excited. Yeah. And then you and the elders of the Jewish people should go to the king of Egypt and will tell him. This is God is instructing this to say to Pharaoh. Verse 18. They will listen to your voice. You should come to the king of Egypt. V'amartam Elov, we should say to the king of Egypt as follows. And this is where the line begins. Hashem Elokeinu Ivrim Nikro Aleinu. God, the God of the Hebrews, has appeared to us. The and now derech shloishes yamim amid. We're going on a 3-day journey in the desert. Hashem Elokeinu. So the Jewish people usually say, we're going to the land of milk and honey. So when you talk to the Jewish people, tell them the truth. Tell them we're going out of Egypt to our own land, the promised land, the land of milk and honey. But then when you guys are going to go to talk to Pharaoh, don't tell them that. Tell Pharaoh we're going on a 3-day journey. And what's the point of it? What's the point of telling Pharaoh 3-day journey? If the plan is that we're going to have 10 plagues and Pharaoh is going to send them out, tell them the truth. God said that we're going to leave Egypt and we're going into the land of Israel, period, end of story. Instead of that, he says to him, tell Pharaoh we're going on a 3-day journey. And then when you open up this week's Parshah, this week's Parshah in verse 300, on page 390, after the third plague, you got 3 plagues. You got blood, you got frogs, you got lice, and then come the plague of wild beasts. And Pharaoh calls Moshe and Aaron, and he says, verse 21, chapter 8, verse 21. Pari calls Moshe and Aaron, and he says, go sacrifice to your God in your land. And Moshe says, we cannot sacrifice in the land of Egypt. The abomination to Egypt if we're going to sacrifice in their land. They're going to stone us. Verse 23, page 390, verse 23, he says, Derech shloishes yomim nelech bamidbar. We have to go a journey of 3 days in the desert. V'zavachnu la'Hashem Elokeinu, will make our offerings to God our God. Kasha yoymar aleinu, as He will command us. Again, a ma'aseh with 3-day journey, that he keeps on convincing Pharaoh that we're going on a 3-day journey. The questions are very, very fundamental and very essential. Why is Hashem commanding in the first place to tell Pharaoh that we're going on a 3-day journey? And we see actually what happens is at the moment of Exodus, for those of you who remember from previous years, it passes by a couple of days and Pharaoh finds out that the Jewish people are not coming back. And he goes out with a great army to chase them all the way down to the Sea of Reeds, to Yamsuf. And this is when he drowns in the ocean. Pharaoh is under the assumption that the Jewish people are not going anywhere. They're just going away for 3 days for a holiday of worship or whatever it is. And all the suffering and all the plagues and all of that is just for them to go for 3 days to have some type of a celebration on a holiday and to come back after the celebration and the holiday. Now, as human beings, our relationship with God is very sacred. The last thing we want to know about God is God is lying. The Gemara says that the signature of God is emes. Truth. That's God's signature. Emes. The Talmud says it in the Tractate of Human. What does it mean that the signature of God is emes? The word emes in Hebrew, that in English is translated as truth, is made out of 3 letters. Aleph is the first letter. Taf is the last letter. And Mem is the middle letter. How is Mem the middle letter? If you count the Hebrew alphabet as 22 letters, then Mem is not the middle letter. There's no middle letter. 22, there's no middle. But if you count the alphabet with the 5 final letters, if you have 27 letters in the Hebrew alphabet, then the middle letter is the letter Mem. So Emet, that this is the word of truth, is the beginning, the middle, and the end, because this is really the definition of truth. How do you know if something is true? Something is true means it always was, it always will be, and is existing right now. If something didn't exist at a certain point, something will not exist at a certain point, it's lacking the essential of being called truth. Something that's true is, for example, what is true? A mathematical equation is true. 2 and 2 equals 4. When did 2 and 2 equal 4? Always. Always will. It was never a situation, unless you are an accountant, then 2 and 2 could equal 5. Yeah. But 2 and 2 equals 4 is truth. It's a true number. It's when something is true, it's always there. God's signature is emes. And here God is clearly saying a lie. Go tell Pharaoh that you're going to go out for 3 days. God has a problem confronting Pharaoh and say, Pharaoh, let him go from Egypt. We're going to destroy you if you don't let him go. That's it. Why use even? What's the whole point of even using this type of a 3-day threat? Question is even more. What's the point of 3 days? Why not 7 days? Why not a week? What's the idea of we're going to serve God in a 3-day journey? If they would take a journey of 1 day and serve God, or they're going to take a journey of 5 days and serve God? What's this mysterious number of 3? Yeah. Now, the outcome of this interesting exodus that they are experiencing, yeah, that they're going for 3 days. I mean, you don't say the truth about how long this journey will take. We see that the whole exodus, the outcome of that was that the whole exodus was done in a big rush, in a very disorganized way. They didn't just leave Egypt as people who are never coming back there. They were running out of Egypt like people someone is chasing them. Yeah, it's like they were running away illegally. Yeah, the normal way of eating is you take off your coat, you make yourself comfortable. The way they were eating that night of Exodus was dressed with their bundles, everything tied up. And as we say in the Haggadah, the Behilu Yatsanim Mitzrayim, the going out of Egypt was done in a lot of haste, a lot of chaos. And actually, we see with Paro himself that after 3 days of their leaving, and it says Ki Boracho, he saw that the nation ran away. He decided to chase them. Now, what happened? Paro forgot that he just begged the Jewish people to leave after the plague of the firstborn. He begs them. He says, "Please leave my place, leave my nation, get out." But Pharaoh was sure he gave them a 72-hour visa. They have a visa to go leave Egypt for 72 hours. This is all slaves. And the plan was they're coming back. He never thought for 1 second that the Jewish people are saying Lashana Hababi Yerushalayim at the end of their Seder. He never thought that the Jewish people are just leaving Egypt for eternity. Now, one of the commentaries is the Ibn Ezra. He says, when Pharaoh chases the Jewish people, the Ibn Ezra says that Pharaoh thought that everything that Moshe talked to him about 3-day journey was all a bluff. He thought they're going to sacrifice. He saw it's 3 days past and they're not coming. And all the commentaries are asking this question that we ask. How did God command Moshe to say a lie? It's not respectful. From God's perspective, God being the ultimate source of truth, to come and say such a thing that is not true from beginning to end. Alter Rebbe in Tanya has this question, chapter 31. Now, let's first of all emphasize something here. It's not that Moshe was told to tell Pharaoh a lie. Yeah. Moshe never says in any moment he tells Pharaoh that we're going for a 3-day journey. Moshe never says we are coming back. He says we're going on a 3-day journey to offer to our God offerings. He never says, and after 3 days we're going to come back. So you can say, he said a white lie. He didn't really say a lie. He only said, like a half a truth. Doesn't he? You don't have to tell the whole truth. You could say, I'm going on a 3-day journey. Now, I'll come back. When Yaakov Avinu meets Esav, you remember the story? Yaakov meets Esav, and Esav says, come, let's go together. We are buddies. Travel with me. What does Yaakov say? I have a lot of children. I have a lot of cattle. You go ahead, and I'll eventually meet you up. Now, when is this eventually going to happen? The Mashiach is going to come. Yaakov and Esav are going to. And we learn, actually, from that incident, we learned that when you encounter someone who might do evil to you, you don't have to say the truth. You could use some type of a white lie, some type of a polished truth, a half a truth, to make sure that you don't get hurt. So when Esav is offering him to travel together, what does he tell Esav? You travel, I'm going to come soon. When is soon? About 4,000 years, we're going to see each other, or whatever it's going to take. So really what Moshe is doing here, you could say, is not really lying to Pharaoh. It's not a lie. He's just telling Pharaoh, we are going to start a journey in 3 days, and ... What's going to happen next? You'll see yourself. Really, we have permission. It's not just permission. When you deal with a deviant, when you deal with a bluffer, when you deal with a thief, you have to do this. What does Yaakov do in order to get the blessings? Yeah, we all know the story. He puts on clothing and he deceives his own father, tricking him to give him the blessings that his father intends to give to Esau. We see already in the religious stories of our Torah, where Avram tells his wife, when we're going to get to Egypt, say you are my sister. This is survival stories. So when Moshe tells Pharaoh we're going for 3 days, you could say, this is a survival technique. Pharaoh, telling Pharaoh we just let those people go. You got to tell him, 3 days, he will buy into it, and then whatever, the next. So the question is not really a ethical question. The question here is more of a theoretical question, or you could say more like talking about Abraham saving his life. You're talking about Yaakov getting the blessings. You're talking about a human being dealing with another human being. I understand you have to use this type of tricks, this type of white lies, half truth in order to get away. Here is God Almighty Himself talking. The guy who is going to deliver 10 plagues on Egypt. God can come and say, tell Pharaoh to let the Jewish people go. And if he's not going to let them go, all hell will break loose on them. Going once, going twice, going 3 times, all the way till the 10th time, out of Egypt. So if Yaakov has to deal with Esau, and I understand, we have to use this type of trickery in order to get out of problems, out of trouble. God Almighty Himself is dealing here. Moshe is just a messenger of God. God is the one who's running the show right now. And 6 months of plagues and they have special effects in Egypt. Every night something else is happening. God Almighty is saying, what's the problem of saying the whole truth to Pharaoh? Let the people go and let them go to the land of milk and honey. Why does he have to hear about the 3-day journey? Now, I started looking around the commentaries, and there's all types of very interesting explanations. But I landed on one commentator that I really found kind of like, sometimes you read commentary and you, okay, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. And then you have the guy who says something that kind of hits the nail on the head. It's like, that's the interpretation I was looking for. He says something very, very interesting. Now, I think this is one of those interpretations that you have to take with your heart more than with your mind. it really touches on a deeply spiritual, psychological element in a human being's life. The Elshich, Ramosha Elshich, is one of the, it's called the Elshich HaKadosh, the Holy Elshich. He writes as follows. He says, if I would say that he should send the Jewish people in a strong arm, then Pharaoh wouldn't have been blamed for any of the 10 plagues. Because there is no wonder, I'm just translating what he says, and I'm going to explain in a minute. There is no wonder that someone will be willing to lose 600,000 slaves. And therefore, when he rejected a 3-day journey, now we all understand that his cruelty is deserving that he will get punished with such severity. What does he say? He says, if Moshe would have come to Pharaoh and say, God said, let the Jewish people go to the land of Israel, period, end of story. Then you would say, okay, Pharaoh rejected that, and he had the right to reject it. Which person is willing to lose in 1 second 600,000 slaves? The guys are working, they are building, they're doing constructions for you. I don't want to accept that. But since what God told them is, let them go for 3 days. Let the employees go out for a day trip. Get buses, get some camels, and let them go for 3 days, a 3-day trip. They're coming back. You're not losing anything. The workers are still working. But this, that he was not willing to even let him go for a 3-day journey, that's cruel. Now we all understand why he deserves to get beaten, because he wouldn't even let him go for 3 days. So the whole 3-day thing, he says, was just in order to amplify how cruel Pharaoh was, that he wouldn't even let him go for a 3-day journey. What's so fascinating about what he says? Let us for a second drop in and understand who is Moshe talking to. Moshe is talking to the king that at that time is the supreme leader of the whole universe. Egypt at that time is, I would say, there's no example these days for a country that rules the whole world, but what United States of America is supposed to be. Comes a Yid, a Moshe, and he shows up to the leader of this entire huge country, and he says, you have all those guys who are working for you, thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of workers. They all have to get out. Whoa. What? Why should they get out? They're doing a good job. How does he say to Moshe? Everybody's working. Everybody's making money. Leave them alone. Stop convincing them that they're going out anywhere. They're not going anywhere. What God is telling Moshe is, Pharaoh has to go through a process to get to the point of letting the Jewish people go. A human being is not a machine. You press a button and he just does what he has to. A human being has to go through some type of a process till he moves, till he gets things in motion. Now, even in physical changes, from day to become night, or from night to become day, it takes about an hour for that shift to happen. It's not like suddenly the light goes on and it becomes morning, and suddenly it becomes dark and it becomes night. The understanding is in this world is that a human being, slowly the light becomes dimmer and dimmer and dimmer and dimmer, and then we become night. Same thing in the morning. It takes an hour and a half process from the deep darkness of 2, 3, 4 a.m. till it becomes fully bright. Even in Seattle, it doesn't become that bright these days, but the idea is we understand, we get the idea is there's a certain rolling of darkness before light and dark, light before darkness. It's part of our blessing, of our awareness, of understanding is changes take a process. Yeah, there was this, those of you remember, there's this king, king in Austria. Actually, my grandfather was one of his soldiers in his army, the King Franz Joseph. King Franz Joseph was one of those outstanding rulers of in Europe about 150 years ago. He was a king for 68 years, very long time for those days. Loved the Jewish people. He was beautiful. He had a lot of Jewish soldiers in his army. My grandfather had a sword great grandfather, had a sword from when he served in Franz Josef's army. And after, I don't know if it's the 40th year or 50th year for his rulership, he wanted to create a special statue for his, a special monument for his 50 years, I think. So the decision was they're going to create an opera house right in the middle of Vienna. They cleared land and they built a gorgeous opera house. And for the night of the opening, the grand opening, they brought the three greatest tenors of the time to play in that night, and the king himself will show up and they're going to open up the opera house. The king shows up. He goes out of his wagon. He came with his chariot, and he's extremely upset. He said, take this old building and just knock it down. This is a waste of it. He's all angry. So after that, they sat down to talk to him about what was the upsetness. He says, when you build an opera house, it has to be a 3-story building. The actual opera place has to be a place that takes about 100 stairs till you get to it. So you get into the building, and then you have to go up more stairs and more stairs and more. And finally you get, after 100 stairs, on the 3rd floor will be the opera house. Can't just go in straight from the street in the opera house. The idea is you got to build up anticipation. You got to build up a certain energy. Someone who walks up the stairs is getting ready. Oh, another step, another step. I'm on the 1st floor. I'm on the 2nd floor. And finally, I got to, my soul is ready to listen to the music. You can't just walk in from your carriage, from your wagon, from the street, boom, entering an opera house. To appreciate the music, you have to go through some type of a process. You got to go through some type of elevation. The Elshich says over here, it says Pharaoh had to go through a process. He can't just come to a person, press his button and say, okay, let the people go. It doesn't work that way. Pharaoh has to start adapting to the idea that the Jewish people actually are not confined within the prison of Egypt. They deserve to get out of Egypt. I mean, not completely, at least for 3 days. Begin with something. The cruelty of Pharaoh was that he was not even willing to entertain the idea that his people deserve a day trip, a 3-day trip. But what's the understanding here? What's the psychological explanation of what's going on with this 3 days? It's not that God is lying to Pharaoh. It's not that Moshe is lying to Pharaoh. We're going to. This is how much Pharaoh is willing to tolerate as information at that moment. You're telling a person who is deeply addicted and deeply disturbed to go and start behaving like a human being. You can't come to the person and say, change your life, stop smoking, cold turkey. Doesn't work. Instead of eating 10 cookies a day, start eating 5 cookies a day. You need to start even bringing the idea that he could start somehow becoming a mensch. He could become a human being. He has a chance. The changing of that Pharaoh's behavior has to happen in a way that Pharaoh at least gets entertaining the ideas. The Jews are going to live for 3 days. Are you going to be okay with that? Nope. Okay, that's cruel. Can you deal with this that it's just going to be gone for 3 days? That's it, 3 days. Nope. Okay. Pharaoh hardened his heart once. He hardens his heart a second time. What comes to an understanding, and this is what I want you to realize, is how much God respects Pharaoh. The cruel Nazi, the Hitler, the Pharaoh is destroying the Jewish people. Even with him, there is a process that is being entertained. We go into the brain of this man and we say, you know what? We can't just go and break him. We give him a chance to do at least a 3-day journey for his slaves. Let's see if he could even deal with that. Obviously, God knows that it's not going to work. Once you go out for 3 days, even Pharaoh knows, once they are gone for 1 second, they are free people. Exodus is not something that happens if it's 6 years or 3 days or 630 days or 6,000 years. The moment a person is out of prison, the moment a person senses freedom, he's a free man. There is nothing, you never can bring him back to enslavement. Yeah, what do we see? Those of you ever watched the movie Shawshank Redemption? There is that piece that actually is being repeated in a different movie as well, where he takes the music and he puts it outside for the prisoners to listen to the music. This is people who weren't hearing music. They weren't ever. And he says, I don't know what the words he's using is. You should just sense that there's a world outside of this. And the second you listen to the music, you're outside of the realms of the walls of prison. You're realizing I'm actually a free person. I'm in prison, but I'm actually free. The music crosses the walls, takes you out of the realms that you are in. Moshe Rabbeinu is being told by God, go tell Pharaoh, let him go for 3 days. This is how much Pharaoh can handle right now. But you know what? If he will handle this, they will be free people. If he could handle letting them go for 3 days, then that's the grand exodus. There's no difference if it's 3 days or 3,000 years. If he could handle this, it means he's letting them go. But don't tell him at this moment the whole truth. He's not willing to accept that. So when you're dealing with a child, or even with your own self, you have to ask yourself sometimes, I want to make a good resolution about my life. You got to ask yourself, how much are you willing to handle right now? How much change can you handle with right now? How much? Can you quit completely that behavior? Or quitting that behavior is impossible. Sometimes you have to be honest with yourself. I cannot quit this behavior completely. I can't see myself. My whole character, I'll become religious overnight. Frum, Shabbos, kosher, family purity, the whole kittel caboodle, impossible. You come to the Jew and he says, you know what, just put on tefillin. Once a week even. Can you do this? Yes, once a week putting on tefillin. Why not? Sunday morning I'll put on tefillin. In the moment he puts on tefillin Sunday morning, he will be putting on tefillin every day. He will be keeping Shabbos, he will be keeping kosher. We believe in the process. It's not an all or nothing game. Give him 3 days and they will become free people and they will get to the land of milk and honey. But give him the chance, give Pharaoh the chance to do something that's attainable to him. Speak to him in a language. Speak to Pharaoh, God, ultimate truth. Speak to him in a language that he can handle. The Jewish people say, we're going to the land of milk and honey. But to Pharaoh, you should say the language that he can tolerate, that he can handle. Obviously, if he's not willing to even do this, he deserves blood, frogs, hail, locusts, and all the whole 9 yards, the whole 10 yards. But give him a chance. It's very interesting. It just brought to my mind. I just remembered myself. We once asked the question is why the Torah has even laws regarding slavery. Yeah, soon we're going to study Parshas Mishpatim. The Torah has laws regarding enslavement. And people ask this question, why does the Torah not say, you shall not enslave? If slavery is so horrible and so negative and so disgusting and so unacceptable in a normal society to enslave a fellow human being, the same God who says you shall not steal, you shall not murder, you should say you shall not enslave a fellow human being. Instead of that, we have a whole parsha of the laws of slavery, almost like saying it's okay to have a slave. Here are the laws how to deal with the slave. And this is what some people want to say. God is really telling us about the laws if you live in a society where there is a slave. So let's say these days when we live in a society that slavery is not acceptable, those laws don't apply. But obviously, certain generations, people had slaves, so you should have known how to conduct this. But my question is, if now as ethical human beings we know that enslaving a fellow human being is a shanda, unacceptable that one human being should enslave another human being, how come God, who is the ultimate truth and the ultimate Torah, who is the, speaks about this, why does God not say in the Torah, you shall not enslave? How hard would that be for humanity to listen? It seems like humanity wouldn't have listened. If God would have said, you shall not enslave, it would be like God saying, you shall not eat. Enslaving at that time was a normal thing to enslave. So to come and say, you shall not enslave, I mean, stealing was never normal. Murdering was never normal. But owning a slave, I mean, till a couple hundred years ago, owning a slave in certain places in the world, till today, it's normal to own slaves. God doesn't give us laws that we cannot listen to, that we cannot hear. What does God do? Very clever. He gives us so many restrictions about owning a slave that it becomes impossible to own a slave. There is so many restrictions around slave ownership that humanity suddenly realized slowly, what is God trying to tell you? Owning a slave is too much responsibility. To have ownership over a fellow human being is way too much responsibility. You got to let go of this. Now, this is a huge boat that has to turn in a raging ocean where everybody's owning slaves and everybody's living with slaves, and it's a society of enslavement. And it takes hundreds of years to trickle down, to drizzle slowly the message. Slavery is not okay. Now, where do we know that slavery is not okay? Look how many laws we have and restrictions about owning a slave. So the Talmud even says, if you own a slave, it's like you bought yourself a master. That you, the person who owns a slave, the slave becomes your master. There's so many responsibilities that you have towards that slave, not even worth it. He becomes your owner, kind of. A whole day you have to be worried about that slave. So God Almighty doesn't come to humanity and say, don't own slaves. God tells us things that we can listen to. And with that listening ship, slowly we go through the process. Again, this is a process. It goes from Chochmah to Bina, from Bina to Das, from Das to Chesed to Gvur. There is a process. Trust the process. When you see your child misbehaving, pause and think for yourself, how can you lead that kid into the process of becoming a better child? I mean, sometimes when his life is in danger, you got to rip him out of the and put him in his place. But believe and trust that if you tell him stuff that he's ready to listen to, you will be able to tell him on more stuff and more stuff and more stuff, and eventually will be able to be in a place of total listenership. This is what Moshe does with Pharaoh. What the Elshich tells us is God Almighty tells Moshe to the Jewish people, tell them, we're going to the land of milk and honey. It's not 3 days. This is, but when you talk to Pharaoh, you got to talk to Pharaoh a language that Pharaoh could maybe handle. hopefully will handle him. We've been able to spare him from the 10 plagues. But if he doesn't let him go for 3 days either, that's already cruel. That's already more vicious than he can be, and this is why we have to go and punish him. The Rebbe writes in one of his teachings, yeah, and he talks about the Rebbe's campaigns of bringing Jewish people closer to Judaism. The Rebbe writes as follows: when you are occupied with teaching Torah and Judaism, you sometimes experience that you spoke to a person and you befriended someone and you tried for a very long time to try to somehow persuade them to do some mitzvahs, and you have not succeeded at all, nothing, and you get discouraged. Walk away from the relationship. My job is to influence people to become better Jews. I don't see them becoming frum. Says the Rebbe, we learn from Egypt that even after Pharaoh got all those plagues, we don't see any changes. But somehow we trust and believe that every one of those 10 plagues affected him with such a change, as we see that by the 7th plague, he admits and he says, Chatasi, I have sinned. And by the 3rd plague, he says, this is the finger of God. There is something that changes, even though you don't see it, you don't hear it, and you just see the cruelty. Somehow, every plague, at a certain point, he lets the male, he's already willing to admit that the man should go out of Egypt. And then he admits that the people should go out, but their cattle and sheep should remain behind. There is subtle changes that you maybe don't recognize. God demands from us things according to our power, according to our ability. But then there is one more layer here, really powerful. When do people usually do their changes in their life? It's very interesting. You know, when everything is calculated and thought out and planned, you know, if we always are in that place of, you know, we're going to calculate how we're going to become better and how we're going to change and how we're going to do things, we usually don't end up doing anything because we are so caught up in the planning and the calculation. There's no real change. There is always the change usually happens, the first step of change happens in a place of no calculation, against all odds. There was this rich Ukrainian oligarch who gave millions and millions of dollars for building yeshivas and schools and Chabad houses. And he always talks about, he says he comes from a society where they never had anything. And suddenly he's making all these huge amounts of money. And it's all for himself. He's buying his boat and he's buying his house and he's buying whatever he was. It was all about filling up his own pockets. And he says he gets approached by this rabbi to give a donation. And he says, I was like the first time hearing this even, I'm going to give a donation. What do you mean give? Didn't exist in his universe, didn't exist the word even giving a contribution. And he says, somehow I ended up giving him $10,000. He says, I could never explain why I gave him the $10,000. I could explain you every donation I gave after that, how good I felt and how amazing it is to be a donor and a philanthropist. I could explain you all the other giving. But that first $10,000 that I gave, it was somehow I had to kind of like override everything about my personality, everything about what I knew, and go and give the donation of $10,000. This is usually when a change happens. It's almost like a theft. You have to kind of like steal and do something that's completely out of the ordinary, something completely abnormal. And this is suddenly when you're like, oh, that's okay. That was good. I just did that. And I see my life is getting better. My life is changing. The leaving Egypt had to happen by the Jewish people in a form of running away. If they would sit there and calculate, okay, we're going to leave tomorrow or next day, it'd be a whole planning system. The way to start a real journey in life begins, and you could hear it from hundreds of stories, where a person comes to that place of like total transcendence. Nothing makes sense to them. And this is exactly where the big success and the big moves are happening in his life. In other words, the first step is being done when both of your hands are still tied behind your back. And this is when you do that. There's a beautiful Talmudic story. The Gemara says in the Tractate of Kiddushin, page 81, the Gemara brings a story about the community in Babylon redeemed this group of girls who were in captivity. And they were looking for a safe house where to keep those girls who were in captivity for a long time. And they put them in the house of a holy man. His name was Reb Amram Hasida, Reb Amram the Pious. And Reb Amram had an attic with places for them to stay. And he gave them the space in his attic. And because he was really worried that he might be interested in maybe doing something that's inappropriate, he took away the ladder, the steps that you could walk from the attic to the bottom floors. It says that it was one day, the sun was shining, and he saw one of those women who were up in the attic, and he became so tempted that he picked up the stairs all by himself. It was quite heavy, but his inclination really overpowered him. And he carried those steps all by himself. And he started climbing up. He was ready to do something that was maybe inappropriate or unholy. And inside of him began this battle between his evil inclination and his good side and his bad side. And the Gemara says that he was standing halfway through the stairs. And he started yelling at top of his lungs, Nura be'amram, there's a fire burning in the house of Amram. Nura be'amram, there's a fire burning. And when someone yells fire, people came running and they saw the rabbi standing in the middle of the ladder. And when people came, obviously it was not anymore a situation where you could continue doing things that are inappropriate. What exactly happened in the story? Talmud tells us the story because the Talmud wants to teach us something. What the Talmud is telling us is changes in life, the movements, the moments of achieving greatness doesn't usually happen at the times when everything is good and nice and you have everything under control and you're free and you kind of like can sit and meditate, and then suddenly good things will happen. The getting out of Egypt, and getting out of Egypt, you're talking about a personal Egypt, getting out of personal Pharaoh and personal enslavement to something that's not okay. And it has to happen in this type of a format. There is no real truth that you can follow. So somehow you're going to get to some type of an end result of something good. You got to just yell out, walk out, click off, and just brush that dust off yourself and begin the first step. This is how everything happens. There's supposed to be this 3-day journey that even though it seems like nothing, we're going to the land of milk and honey, but it has to be a running out of Egypt. This is the first step. In the language of Hasidus, it's called iskafia. Iskafia means bending down your inclination a little bit. A little bit. And it says that little bending over your inclination, saying no to yourself, that's it. One little no to yourself, you bring and reveal the divine presence in your life and in the whole world. You're bringing God's appearance in the whole world. Why? Because this is all it takes. It takes while you are in the temptation and while you are in the chaos and while you're in the enslavement and you feel all tangled up and this is the moment you go and you're like, click it off. Yeah, for some of us, we're like, addicted to Netflix or something in the middle of a show and you realize it's inappropriate, it's destructive, it's not okay. I shouldn't be watching it. I shouldn't be going to sleep on time. It's wasting my day. No, but I'm going to watch it. And then you go and you just click it off. Boom. What you did was you punctured a hole in Egypt. You went out for 3 days. What happened at that moment? It's in the beginning of a process of ultimate redemption, the land of milk and honey. But it has to be, it's almost kind of like it's forced to happen in a way like this. It has to be in a way of like you all submerged and you're all bondaged up and you're all feeling the enslavement all over you. And at that moment you break out. So many stories of people that, they made a decision that they're not going to smoke on Shabbos. That's it. I mean, they planned to stop smoking a long time ago. But they got inspired that on Shabbos, I'm not going to smoke. And today there are families, kosher, family purity, keeping Shabbos, keeping a religious life for them, for their children, for their grandchildren. And you ask them, where did it all start? Where did the change start in your life? Should I tell you? There was this gum that I like called chiclet gum. I made a decision that because chiclet gum is not kosher, I am not eating chiclet gum anymore. That's it. He says, that's it? You stopped eating gum and this is how you become all religious? Yes. This is how it starts. You make one decision. On an airplane, I'm eating only kosher food. I want to order kosher food on the plane. I want to put on tefillin once a week. I want to make one thing special on Shabbos. I'm not touching my cell phone for 24 hours. That's the beginning of a process that somehow God Almighty looks at it and he says, if he's willing to do that, he's out of Egypt. Pharaoh has a chance. Yeah? The leader of Egypt has a chance. Each and every one of us, you have a chance. It takes one little breaking out of your enslavement, little bit, and you become a free person. The Alter Rebbe says it in Tanya, chapter 31, and this is the most powerful words. He says, Iskafia means going out of Egypt. The nation is ran out. Kiborach ha'om, the nation is running. Asks the Alter Rebbe the opening question of tonight's class. Why was it? Why if Pharaoh would be told by God to send them out as free people, would he never send them out? Says the Rebbe in the Tanya, is because the evil power was so strong in the souls of the Jewish people. They had so much contamination that did not even go away till Matan Torah. But their entire interest and the entire will was just to get out of the exile of the Sitra Achra, the impurity of Egypt, and to cleave to God. That's all they wanted. And therefore, it had to be 10 plagues, and it had to be that moment of running, because this is how the Exodus is going to happen. The Exodus begins, the freedom begins in that moment when the person is willing to just make that first step into light. In the second, a person is willing to make that step. In the second, a person is willing to do that iskafia, he's a free person. My father-in-law, some of you have heard the story, but it's worth to repeat it. My father-in-law is a rabbi, Yot Nechama's father, is a rabbi in the maximum security prison in New York State. It's called the Den Amora. This is only people who are in that prison. Nobody is there because they didn't make Kiddush on Friday night. This is people who, all of them, did really bad things. And he's the rabbi in that prison, he's a chaplain. And it takes a person like my father-in-law to really be able to connect to this type of a people. He has a soul that is unexistent in our generation. He's a real tzaddik. And he shared a story, something that happened in the prison a couple of months ago. He says there's this big guy in the prison that every once a week or every couple of days, my father-in-law has all the Jewish prisoners showing up together in a specific room, and everybody puts on tefillin. They stand in line, he puts on tefillin to everyone, and then they sit together and they make some singing, some prayers, and then he teaches them some Torah. And there is this guy who is showing up, but he doesn't want to put on tefillin, refusing to put on tefillin. Every week, everybody is offering to put on tefillin. This guy is refusing to put on tefillin. Please, want to do the mitzvah? Nope, he doesn't want to put on tefillin. After a couple of months that he tried to persuade the person to put on tefillin, one day the guy walks in and he stands first in line. He says, Rabbi, I'm first. My father-in-law is like, every week he doesn't want to put on tefillin. What happened? What changed? He says, you know what changed? Iskufia. This is what changed. He says, what? He says, Iskufia. You know what Iskufia is? He says, what are you talking about? He says, remember last week you taught us from this book about something called Iskufia, that if you really, really want to do something bad and you don't do it, you bring the revelation of God on yourself and on the world. I made a decision to do Iskufia. So he says in prison, he doesn't have a job. Now, someone who doesn't work in prison means that you go out of your cell only for 3 meals a day. That's it. Maybe out of 24 hours, you may be out of your cell altogether for an hour and a half or 2 hours a day. But because he doesn't have a job, he sits in his room and he has magazines that is not inappropriate to look at. And every week when he came to put on the tefillin, he felt that his hands are too contaminated and too impure that tefillin should be laid upon them. But he made a decision last week after the class that he's not looking at those magazines anymore. And a week straight passed by, and he did not touch those unkosher, unhealthy magazines. And now he feels ready to put on his tefillin because he did his kufya. My father-in-law finished up the story and he says, you know, there is a person who is in the free world. He has free Wi-Fi and he has a free house and he has a free phone and is completely imprisoned, completely in jail, completely in exile, completely suffocating in his own exile. But then you have a man who lives in prison, maximum security prison, and he manages to break free from one craving, one bad behavior, doing his skafia for 1 week. And suddenly he's putting on his tefillin. He says, you are right now more of a free man. And most of those people who are coming home and they just land on their phone and they're enslaved and in bondage in their taivas and their desires and temptations. What Moshe is being told by God to speak to Pharaoh, he says, you're going to talk to the greatest addict. You're going to talk to the most degenerate bum, to the biggest lowlife existing in humanity. His name is Pharaoh. He's not just a bad guy. He's the leader of all the bad guys. You're going to try to change him. We're going to try to break that Pharaoh so he can let go of that enslavement. Moshe, please talk to him as you're talking to a king. Use respectful language. I know you're coming in the name of God, so you feel you could say whatever you want and God will protect you. It doesn't work that way. We see Moshe is being told by Parshah, by God, that you have to respect the king. And not only respect him by talking to him in a respectful language, so he's even willing to listen to you. When you tell him about letting the Jewish people go, tell him 3 days. That's all he can hear right now. And it's perfectly fine with me. I just need him to agree for 3 days. That's it. So when you are talking to yourself, yeah, something in you that you feel this is your Pharaoh, or something in yourself that you feel that this is your Egypt, this is your emotional bondage that you are in, something that's really holding you back. Don't be mean to yourself. It's very easy to be very mean and judgmental and critical to yourself and say, I'm this, I'm that. First of all, speak to yourself nicely. Talk to yourself in a soft voice. You might be surprised how more you're receptive to listen to yourself when you're talking to yourself nicely. Stop hurting yourself. Stop stabbing yourself. Stop calling yourself names. That's number one. Number two, when you talk to yourself about those things that you feel that you can change. There's certain things that that's going to be easy for me to do. Show yourself that you can prove yourself that you could do the easy stuff. 3 days. Stop doing whatever you're doing or stop behaving for 3 days. Can you do this for 3 days? You're a very strong person. Look, till now, you wouldn't even entertain an idea of letting go of that addiction for 3 days or letting go of that habit for 3 days. Give it 3 days. Can you do this? Now, if you can't do this, then blood, frog, hail, then we're going to go. But can you allow? This is the basics. Moshe talked to Pharaoh. We're not lying to Pharaoh. We're not telling him something that's not true. We're telling him what he can hear. What an educational message here. What a powerful understanding in how rehabilitation begins by a person. Let him try for 3 days. Let him see how it feels. He might like it. You might like this new life once you try it for 3 days. And by the way, once you try it for 3 days, you'll be hooked. It's going to be forever. You're going to be already in the land of milk and honey. Because that is kafia. Once you fracture that ego a little bit, it's totally fractured, broken. You're totally in a world of spirit. The message is really clear. And each and every one of us, getting ready now for Rosh Chodesh Shvat and getting ready for Yud Shvat. The Rebbe's discourse of Yud Shvat is all about iskafia. It's all about doing that first step. So each and every one of us should take a moment and think about which thing, what is that one thing in your life that you always wish would change, it would be better. Then you could start, first of all, giving yourself a hug and speak nicely to yourself. And see if you could maybe try for 3 days to break away. You'll be very surprised the outcome of a change that happens in 3 days. And you know what? Next week, when we're going to be learning about God Almighty instructing the Jewish people to take a lamb and hold it by their bed for 3 days, we're going to talk a little bit more about this meaning of why 3 days? Why not 1 day? Why not a week? And here comes a whole new understanding in the development of a human being. There is something that happens to a person when he does something for 3 days. From Abraham, who is traveling for 3 days to do the binding of Isaac, takes 3 days. Moshe imprisoning his brothers for 3 days. God commanding the Jewish people to tie a lamb to their bed for 3 days. And Pharaoh chasing the Jewish people after 3 days. Matan Torah as a 3-day preparation. There's something that happens in a person in 3 days. So in order for you to remember what the topic of this coming week class is, I want to tell you all that next week, the class is going to be on Tuesday. Same time, Tuesday at 8 o'clock, not on Thursday. I'm not going to be available on Thursday next week. So next week, Tuesday at 8 o'clock, the third day of the week, we're going to continue the next segment a little bit more on the topic of Exodus in 3 days. I hope you enjoyed tonight's class. Anybody is there